as far as I am concerned, Hayabusa, Tanaka, and the rest of that crew can't wear these people's shoes. They're too big for these so-called athletes. And I say not so-called because of their strength. I say so-called because of their heart. When you have a sin with no guts and the heart of a chicken, you produce wrestlers that have no guts and hearts of chickens. Now you have got the funk masters of wrestling that are all heart, all guts, and we're not taking a backseat to anyone. No, never, never, never.
What you gonna do? That's cool. Are you talking a name? Pro Wrestling Radio.
Oh, get some! Take it down!
Oh, the damn soul! Call in with a question or comment.
Just bring it! What is he doing?
At 1-888-922-2149.
Oh, and it's true! Don't make me hurt you! You got it! That's all time! I hate you ever!
And now your host of the show.
That's how I live! And that's the bottom line of the
Alrighty, welcome to a very special edition of Pro Wrestling Radio. You heard him in the beginning, and he is our guest for the entire hour. So let's not waste any time. He is the author of the autobiography, Terry Funk, More Than Just Hardcore. He is a former ECW and NWA World Heavyweight Champion, a true legend in the business, and most importantly, I have had the honor of calling some of this man's great matches. He is Terry Funk. Terry, welcome back to the show.
Well, it's great being back again. Last show that we were on, I thought it was a dang good one, you know.
Oh, I
was just wondering who that guy that was at the front of that promo right there, who was that guy hollering and screaming? That guy could talk.
Who was that crazy masked man?
I don't know. That boy was wild, wasn't he?
My producer looked at me and said, "Is that your guest?"
Yeah, right.
well, Terry, off the bat, what do you remember about doing that Funk Masters of Wrestling deal? It sounded like a lot of fun.
It really was, you know. And the reason I went with Funk Masters of Wrestling, if you think about it, see, is I could play right off of the FMW.
Mm-hmm.
See, and Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling is what it was.
Right.
So that's FMW. So I played off of the same letters of it. FMW is Funk Masters of Wrestling. And it worked wonderful. It worked great. It was really a hot item over there in Japan, and did big business with it. You know, we did 45,000 people for a match over there without any television.
Wow.
You know, 40,000. I don't know if it was 45, 38, 45, 42, whatever they said it was, but it was a hell of a crowd. You know, it was pretty much a full stadium.
Yeah,
you know.
Absolutely. You know, an obvious question to start off with these days is, how are you feeling?
Feeling absolutely, I'm not going to say great.
Yeah.
I'd be lying to you. I'm feeling much, much better than what I was, and doing better day by day, and it just takes a little bit of time, you know, come off of all that different stuff that I came off of, and you also have to get your confidence back, too, you know, and before you have to believe that you're feeling good before you can feel good.
Sure. Speaking of professional confidence, when you were in WCW the last time, and you write a lot about this in your book, and the way they used you as compared to the way that you've been used in other places throughout your career, did it hurt your confidence? Did you ever question your confidence at all during that time?
Not my confidence. I just questioned my sanity. But I also questioned their sanity at the time, you know.
Yeah.
I just thought I had a great deal to offer to them, and whenever I got there, evidently it was somebody up in the hierarchy that wanted me, but the people immediately, my superiors, weren't sure whether they needed me or not.
Right.
You know, they certainly didn't loosen the reins and let me take off running.
No.
Well, and I don't blame them. It's their business.
Sure.
You know?
Sure.
But I try not to, I try never to hurt a territory. You know, I love coming into territory and popping it. That was one of the great things. Going down to Florida, you know, or to any place, you know, and going in and actually increasing their attendance, and then whenever I leave, is to leave that attendance where it is, if not better.
Do you think that you have more of an appreciation for that, the way that you were brought up with your own territory and with your father's territory?
Oh, absolutely. Because, you know, if you want to go back, it's just the way that you were brought into the business and the way that you were brought up. And I was brought up in the business, and I was brought up around wrestlers. And I knew the guys that were not making a real good living, but they were making a living.
Right.
And I knew these stars, too, you know, and I knew how they tried to help each other. And I watched them, you know, and I watched my dad was concerned about guys that weren't the greatest in the ring, but that were his friends, and he wanted to see them make a decent living in the profession and be able to continue it and enjoy life the way that they want to. And that's the same thing with me. Is you know, I wish I could help more than what I do now. You know, I wish I was younger and in my prime and could go to some different places and possibly pop up with a new organization and give it a total 100% of all, which I do give, but with all of my time I don't, because I can't give all of my time. Used to, as we'd wrestle 7 nights a week, and now we can't do that. You know, I can't do it. Physically speaking, I'm fortunate to get in there, you know, once a week or once every other week. I really prefer, and once a year, you know, as I keep on burying the business in my backyard, but I keep on digging it up, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and speaking of what you're saying, I don't think people realize, unless they were actually there. I was lucky enough to be there in ECW as a ring announcer, and then, you know, weaseling my way into the locker rooms, you know, for a couple years before that.
Isn't that wonderful to have to weasel your way and not be just accepted into there? It really is, and I mean, when you make it, you really appreciate it, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. It's so different than it is today. It's just so, it is. And what I was going to say was that I don't think people realize the importance of having a veteran like yourself, of your stature, in a blossoming company like that, and the kind of asset that somebody like yourself would be to a new company, just to kind of bring the reins in a little bit.
Well, you know, as I often talk about this, about what is a leader and everything else, you know, and my favorite leader of all time in professional athletics was John Ayers of the San Francisco 49ers. He was an offensive guard for him. He was a great player. He and Randy Cross were the guards for him at the time. Joe Montana was the quarterback, and they just won 2 Super Bowls back-to-back. And John Ayers was a leader of that team. But it was really funny because John Ayers, and Joe Montana will tell you that today if you ask him, is that John Ayers was a leader. He later passed away with cancer at 44, and I'm the godfather of his children. But John Ayers was a great man, and the reason he was such a good man, because he'd come back to the sideline when he was on the sideline, and he wouldn't sit next to coach, and by golly, he'd sit down on the end of that bench. And by golly, he'd sit there, and then he'd go back in whenever it came his time, and he'd do his job.
Yeah.
And John Ayers he wasn't the guy that said, let's go attack or let's go do this or that. He did it by his actions and not by his words. And that's why everybody loved him so much. He's a very quiet man. Yeah. And I'll never be the man that he is or was, but I would really like to be that kind of person. And, somebody asks me a question, I'll answer it in the dressing room. You know, if they ask me to watch their match, I'll watch it. If they ask me to critique something, I'll critique the whole show for them. But, it's the way I think a person should do it, and lead by his actions, and try to try to give people 100% when you go into that ring so the others can see that.
Yeah.
And try to do it for your fellow wrestler and not for the payoff.
Yeah, and not taking anything away from anybody else, but the last pair of shows that I was down for MLW, you were in on the second night, and the first night you weren't in, and you could just tell just a difference in the locker room by having a presence, just a presence alone of somebody like yourself. And this takes nothing away from the other guys there.
Well, I don't know if I've got that kind of a presence. Maybe something else happened in the locker room that we didn't know about, or something that gave that presence, because I don't know if I got that kind of presence, but I sure do love those boys.
Wow.
I love all the young guys in business.
Yeah. Does it bother you sometimes when you see some of your peers from your day, or maybe a couple years after, and they come into a dressing room and they just have their nose up in the air and don't want to talk to anybody and just kind of collect their money and go home?
You know, my wife and I were talking about that just like last night, you know, and it just amazes me that that those people that do that sometimes surpass all the others. Mm-hmm. And they totally expect to be treated like that.
Yeah.
And they just don't understand. They just don't understand. It's a guy that they are dancing with that makes them. And even a guy that they are dancing with, if he couldn't hold up his tutu or tights or whatever you want to call them, well, if he couldn't even hold up his tights, you can't do it by yourself in a ring. You know, you can say you can dance with a broomstick, but brother, it better be a short dance.
Yeah, and I'll tell a story here that there was a pair of MLW shows, and you know, and you were in town doing those shows, and so was Jerry Lawler. And I guess he just wasn't having a good night, and he really wasn't talking to anybody and kind of keeping to himself. And you took it upon yourself to go over there and pretty much told him to lighten up a little bit.
Well, I don't know if I told him to lighten up. I don't think I ever told Jerry to lighten up. But I'll tell you one thing about Jerry is I just love him, you know. Yeah. And I've never seen Jerry go into a ring and not perform. He can be in any attitude that he is, but he's one of those guys too that are just great performers, you know. And a lot of guys ask, and then again, you know, who's the great workers in the business, you know?
Yeah.
Well, you know, sometimes it's kind of, and I got to thinking about that. And you know, that gum Dusty Rhodes is pretty great because he was able to make a lot of money a lot of years.
Sure.
You know, and without a whole lot of effort. Well, he was doing something right. You know? But I'll be darned if he, you know, and it's the truth, you know. The greatest, maybe that the most money is the one that makes the most money. The greatest worker is the one, you know, possibly he is.
Yeah.
You know, possibly he is because he's working with that promoter too.
Yeah.
And he's working with the people and everyone else. But I don't like to think of things that way, but possibly it's true, you know. And a lot of those, you know, the squeaky wheels. Mm-hmm. They certainly got the grease at WCW, didn't they?
They sure did. And again, we are talking to Terry Funk. He is the author of the autobiography, newly released, More Than Just Hardcore. And speaking of Lawler, you went down to Memphis last year, and I'm not just saying this because you're on the show, because I was saying this at the time, that was some of the best TV, the promos that you sent in and the angle where you came out of the coffin on TV. Are you going to be going down there and doing anything else? Because you guys had a heck of a house down there.
Well, Corey Mack's been calling me back up, you know, and he wanted me to come down there and go one more round with Lawler, and it's and I promise you that I'm shooting you straight right now. Mm-hmm. Is that ECW show's coming up with Shane Douglas, mm-hmm. and I know that's going to take a lot out of me.
Yeah,
and it really is, and I truly, and a lot of you fans think I'm nuts and say, oh well, he's retired. I have. But I've gone out there and I've buried wrestling in the backyard, dug a hole for it, put it down in there, and I forever find myself going back out there and digging it up for my love of the business.
Yeah.
And I continue to do that. And again, this time, you know, God, don't quote me as I'm going to quit the business. certainly if somebody offered me $5 million to do one more moonsault, I probably would do it. Or maybe a double moonsault and disappear up my butt or whatever, But dadgummit, it's a business that I just love it, and I want to continue on in it. And like I said, as I keep on going back there, and I keep on going back to it, And again, as Corey Mack is concerning him, as dadgummit, he wants me to come down there and commit to a date. And right now, I'm not trying to commit to any dates because I'm just tired and just thinking about doing one last real good one up there at ECW.
Yeah,
and I really want to, and I could have gone either place, and I picked the one.
Yeah.
So I better be good in the one.
So you're not going to be involved in the WWE one?
No, I'm not. They sent me a contract, and it was be very honest with you, it was a much more lucrative contract. I could have done them both. I could do, but again, I want to perform at my best, and I don't want to perform it like a fool at my age, and I want to perform at my best, and I feel I can only do one of those shows and perform greatly in a weekend.
Yeah.
And so I picked the one closest to my heart, and that is the Shane Douglas show, because I feel that is the ECW fans.
Yeah.
I feel that the other fans at the other show are going to be wannabe ECW fans. They're going to be make-believe ECW fans. They're not going to be real ECW fans at Vince's show. The real group, even though you might want to believe that they aren't. The real ECW fans are going to be in Philadelphia at Shane Douglas's show.
Yeah. And now, what do you remember about, and I don't know if you remember much about
it. And the money was quadruple or triple of what Shane Douglas is going to pay me, and that show is going to pay me. And by golly, I just want to still show the fella that there's, it's a true thing. You need competition in the wrestling business, and Vince certainly has, and if you don't have competition, it's a proven fact that businesses die. And it might be true about people too, So what I want to do is I want to beat competition to Vince and keep that Henri Cuss alive a few more years.
Yeah. What do you remember about the first three-way dance that you guys did? Because really, and I was there, and a lot of people say they were there, but and they weren't, but they've seen it on videotape, and it really did change the face of ECW. It just brought the matches to a new level. What do you remember about the very first three-way dance that you and Sabu and Shane did?
Well, it was very creative. It was the whole thing. Was a new situation. It was a new look to wrestling.
Yeah.
It really was, and it brought wrestling into the present state of the put your butt on the line state of 100% in that ring state.
Right.
And that's what you have to do, and it kind of established that.
Yeah.
And it established, because we went so long and we wrestled so hard, it established a level or a bar that needed to be reached before things were accepted.
Yeah. Yeah, and it really was. It really did, set the wheels in motion of the next stage for ECW, which was such a great thing.
It was such a creative match too.
Yeah,
it really was. It was 60 minutes of a whole lot of creativity that was going on, just mentally, that was taking place within the ring itself, among three guys, and it was a wonderful, and I hate to use the word again, but it was a wonderful dadgum, and very hard to duplicate, and that's what really scares me.
Yeah.
Because we're coming up with Sabu and I and Shane. Here I am, as I'm a real old toot right now, and Shane is not as young as he used to be, and Sabu, he's been through a lot of physical trials, and dadgummit, I just hope that we can produce what they want.
Yeah.
And I think that we're going to give it heck.
Excellent, excellent. Well, listen, we're going to take a quick break, and I'm going to ask if you can hang on through the break.
You bet.
All right, excellent. We are talking to the legendary Terry Funk. He is the author of the brand new autobiography, Terry Funk, More Than Just Hardcore. And when we come back, we'll try and cover as much of this man's great and lengthy and legendary career as we possibly can before 1 o'clock. You're listening to the radio show in two places. One, on the internet through my website, ProWrestlingRadio.com, WBCB1490.com, and on the air, WBCB 1490 AM.
Back. Take off the robe and show them your back. Now turn around. Oh, Ric Flair has a yellow streak down his back.
This is ridiculous. This is embarrassing, Terry. You're talking about the world champion of the NWA.
Hey, I want to tell you kids something. Don't believe in Santa Claus. And remember, Old Yeller ain't no dog.
And now back to more Pro Wrestling Radio. I'm your host of the show, Eric Garcia.
All righty, we are back, and we are joined by the legendary Terry Funk. And Terry, it seems like that interview alone from your series with Ric Flair has taken on a whole life of its own these days. Terry, are you there?
I didn't know that was still alive. My gosh.
It's like a walk down memory lane. You know, I love it when I have the legends on the show and I'll pick some random stuff out from their career. And most of the time, like I had Dusty on 2 weeks ago, and I played an interview from '84, and he just sat there silent for about 10 seconds, and he said, you know what, I am humbled just listening to that. And I think that's really cool when
Yeah, dadgum Dusty's humbled. He's amazed. He thought he was some heavenly body speaking that he heard there. And, he was humbled by himself. That sounds very much like the dream. He gets so humbled in his American dream, and he says, heartbeat of America. He says, my little baby was on my chest, and I said, honey, what do you hear? And she says, I hear the heartbeat of America.
That is tremendous. You know what's great about both of your books? You guys both have the same Dr. Jerry Graham story in your book.
But they're different versions.
Yeah.
But they're truthful. It's just, you know, Ray Stevens used to always tell me that, and I said it in the book too. Ray Stevens always said, if it's good enough to tell, it's good enough to color up a little bit. You know, but honestly, I don't know. I haven't read his version.
Yeah, it's slightly...
I'm sure he's read my version, though.
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to read that fat egg-sucking dog's book. That dermatophyte.
And the beginning of his wrestling career is a lot different than the way you describe it in your book.
Oh, his wrestling career?
Yeah.
Well, well, which one do you believe? You know, Dusty, but I'll tell you one thing about the Dream, Mo, is he is the American dream.
Yeah.
And that's one wonderful thing, too, about our business, you know. And that's the one great thing that I discuss in the book. You know, one of the good things, not great, one of the good things that I discuss is that for years we were extensions of our own personalities.
Yeah.
And that was our character. And Dusty Rhodes is the American dream.
Yeah.
And, you know, but Vince wanted to go a different route and do the dialogue and all of this. And it's, I like wrestling the way it was, and I think that's why there's such a great resurgence in the 70s and 80s, you know, as I go to Carolinas and wrestle for Tony Hunter, and he draws like crazy, you know.
That's what I hear. I hear the crowds on there are tremendous.
Yeah, and they go over there, and the crowds that Harley have are just so respectful and wonderful over there, you know, and he does a great business too, you know, but it's wrestling the way it was. It's not how it is, it's the way it was.
Yeah.
And who knows where we're headed, you know?
Yeah,
it's really becoming very difficult to predict right now.
Wow. And we're talking to a guy that everybody says predicted WrestleMania years ahead of its time.
Well, by golly, I'm getting more, as I just love it. If I make enough predictions, they forget the bad ones and keep the good ones. They forget about the mistakes. Like Chainsaw Charlie.
Right.
And Doctor Knows It All.
That was a good one. I never heard of that one until I read it in your book.
That's honestly the truth. It sounds so stupid that it sounds like a big lie, but it's not. You can find Joe Blanchard. He's in the San Antonio phone book, and call him up and ask him if I wasn't Doctor Knows It All for 1 week on his TV.
Do you think that's a big misconception? Because a lot of people remember, when you came in doing the Chainsaw Charlie thing, everybody at the time was saying, all the hardcore fans were saying, I can't believe they're doing that to Terry Funk. I think I even said that to you when I ran into you.
Yeah, it wasn't Vince.
Yeah.
It was me. I'm not a fond lover of the man either.
Right.
But I'll be honest, I don't want him to get credit for creating that fiasco.
Yeah. Talking a little bit about 1989, you write a lot in your book about how it came about that you wound up, in the retirement match and then doing commentary and all that good stuff. And we talked about it actually the last time you were on the air here. But what I thought was interesting, that I just heard an interview with Ric Flair that was conducted a couple of years ago, but I just heard it, and a caller on the radio show brought it up, and they said, why did you do it? And he said, it wasn't me. It was Jim Ross and Jim Herd, and I had nothing to do with it.
Well, see, as he knew it was there.
Right.
See, and that's, was that, and by golly, I don't care. That's water under the bridge.
Yeah.
But I mean, it happened, and I never said it was because of this one person.
Right.
I just figured, I knew that it had happened. I knew that it took place, and you assume that it's the whole committee.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Now, at the time, you were arguably the hottest heel in the business in '89, and I remember going to the shows, going to a couple of the Bash shows, and it was just something that you don't see today. I mean, when you would go after people, they would run. They were that scared of you. After you were winding down that angle, and they wanted to push you into the commentary role, was there any thought to jumping over to Vince at the time, since you were so hot?
Not really.
Yeah.
Not really. You'll find me, as at that time I was very happy with the situation down there. The money was great.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't happening with the behind the scenes politics of it.
Yeah.
But I was somewhat happy with the scheduling, and it was hard work, but it's awful tough on me to go to New York because of geography, and it's a long way from here.
Right.
And that sounds rather silly, but I'm gonna do the same thing over and over again, and I don't care who it's for or what. As I've always been my own boss, and I love being my own boss, and I'm a bit of a Bolshevik, and I like to go out and earn a bunch of money in as quick a time and as short a time as I can, and come back home and enjoy life and be thankful for the people that came to the arenas, whether to boo me or cheer me. It didn't matter. They paid admission to see me, and thankful for them, and dadgummit, and on down the road the Funker goes with as few dates as I can make in a year, so I can be at home with my family and be home on the place that I love.
Yeah.
And if you're from New York, you think about it a little bit. If that's home, it'd be a pretty good place to stay too. But it's not my home.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Now, I had on occasion the honor of sitting in a production meeting with Gary Hart, who you talk a lot about in the book. And Gary's just tremendous. And Gary was telling a story during the meeting. He was telling all kinds of stories, but he was telling us a story about the aftermath from the infamous bag angle that you guys did in '89. Can you kind of recap that? What happened afterwards?
Oh gosh, afterwards it's just chaos. I mean, they came to us, and it was so absurd. It was such a small thing, you know, and I mean, it really was, but I mean, it just for some reason, you know, I mean, here you look at the violence that we have on TV today and the violence that's in the movie screens and what we depict on the news shows and everything else, and what I did is just hold a plastic bag over his head there. The people went insane all the way across the United States. And they had to jerk the show, you know, and they couldn't, for one reason, but that was, I guess it was just, oh my God. But then again, see, as you have to remember at the suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
And see, back then you could suspend disbelief.
Yeah.
Now it's very difficult.
I think, if I remember right, I think he was telling me the story, and he said that they called you guys into an office, and they said, whose idea was it? And you said it was his idea.
That's right. It was. But Gary Hart's very proud of that, though. If I try to claim that now, he'd get mad at me.
What's the reaction been to the book among the fans and among your peers?
It's going very well. They're going through 2 editions now, and hopefully going to start a 3rd one. Mm-hmm. And it's a very good response. Hopefully it picks up on its own. You know, as I'm not Jane Fonda, I can't get on Good Morning America and go ahead and cry the blues and say, I'm sorry I went and dressed up like a Viet Cong over there and went running around with them and shed some tears and then sell 1 million books. It doesn't work that way.
Maybe you could go on TV and cry about putting a bag over Ric Flair's head and you'll sell 1 million books, right?
Well, if I could, I'd darn sure try to get on. But what the deal is, though, is it's much more difficult than that for me because it's hard work.
Yeah.
And a lot harder work than I thought it was. You know, as writing a book was a piece of cake. It was great, you know, dealing with Scott Williams, who's a great person and a good writer, too. But it's a whole lot different with that was the easy part. The hard part is getting it out there and letting people know. And just like your show right here.
Yeah.
I'll bet I've done, and this is no exaggeration, I'll bet I've done over 200 shows.
Wow.
You know, radio and here and there and going here and book signings and this and that. And seems like I'm going to continue on, you know, but it sure makes you think, dadgummit, Funk, are you doing the right thing here? You know, hopefully I am, and I think I am.
Yeah.
You know, I really wanted to tell the story because sometimes we have a need to tell a story, or a story needs to be told.
Yeah.
And I tried to tell that story, the story of wrestling for the past 40 years in that book, and how it's changed, and somewhat of how it's evolved from my father's time to now. And I really felt the need to do that, and did it, and I think it's a decent job of it, too. I know that without Scott Williams, I couldn't have done it, because he's such a wrestling historian, and I can go back and I can say, yeah, and I was in Atlanta, and dadgum, and then I went from Atlanta to Vancouver, and Vancouver to Houston. I can remember where I went, but I'll be dadgummed if I can remember the year. You know what I mean?
Right, right.
Or you know, and the date.
Yeah.
And he can look up at, you know, I can remember the time that Wahoo and I wrestled, you know, and he knows it. And that's what takes that tremendous time off of the writing of the book. You know, I mean, that book would have taken me a couple of years to write.
Yeah.
And we whipped it out pretty doggone fast, and it was because of his knowledge of wrestling and his wonderful mind for the business and dates and the history in the business.
Good, good. And before I go to my second and final break, I have to ask you, you talk a little bit about Bruno Sammartino in your book, and I have Bruno Sammartino on the show next week, and he's actually a pretty frequent guest on the show, and I've gotten to know him a little bit since having him here, and I think the world of him. But I think what's really odd is over the last couple of years, guys like Dusty and Hogan and Flair have put out these books and taken shots at Bruno. And
you know, I mean, I love Bruno.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, there is a very, very honorable man. There is a guy that certainly protected his profession more than, and I don't mean this bad whenever I say it. I'm not knocking Dusty. That certainly protected his profession more than Dusty. Certainly protected his profession more than Ric Flair. Certainly protected his profession more than Hulk Hogan. But also, he certainly protected his profession more than Terry Funk. And I think that that's a wonderful trait. And I think that he's one hell of a man. And gosh, I really mean that. He's just I've always admired him to no end, you know.
Yeah.
As he had an opportunity, doggone near split up with Vince McMahon Sr. because Shohei Baba, he met him he met him. And by golly, whenever Bruno says, and they became friends, and whenever they become friends, you become Bruno's friends, well, he'll never let you down. He'll never forget that, and Vince Sr. went with Inoki. Bruno says, I'm not going to do that. He went with them in New Japan. And Bruno says, I'm not going to do that. Baba's my friend. And he went with the threat of Vince McMahon Sr. going ahead and destroying his career.
Yeah.
If he took the belt from him, that would destroy his career. But he went with that threat. He went right over there to All Japan, which was Shohei Baba's company, and wrestled for him. Because Baba was his friend, and he would not in any way or form do anything to hurt him. And I know for a fact he went over there for a pittance of what he could have gotten, and just expenses, because he wanted to help the guy out, because he was his friend. So how can you knock a guy like that?
Right, absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, we are talking with Terry Funk. Terry, we're going to head to our last break. We'll bring back some memories when we come back from the break, so keep your ears open, and we'll bring you right back. All right, we are talking to Terry Funk. He is the author of the autobiography, Terry Funk, More Than Just Hardcore, and you're listening to the radio show in two places. One on the internet through my website, ProWrestlingRadio.com, WBCB1490.com. It'll be there, WBCB 1490 AM.
Today I have paid the price.
How do you plan to do it? How are you going to beat this?
How do I
The
plan
man's
to do it?
invincible.
The man is invincible. How can you say he's invincible?
Nobody's going to know.
How many years has that man been wrestling professional compared to myself? What family does he come from? Where did he come from in the wrestling world? From some rock band or something? Do you realize that I started wrestling when I was 5 years old? I wrestled amateur all the way through high school. I wrestled amateur all the way through college. My father was a professional wrestler.
You're going to
My brother was a professional wrestler. And I am going to keep the family name going. Am I going to brand him?
Yeah.
I might just brand you here on television.
You don't intimidate me.
I don't intimidate you. How would you like for us to turn you around and pants you right here on television and brand you right here? Do you realize I want to be treated with respect? I want to be treated with respect. You are talking to the next WWE.
Let's see what this man does in the ring. Come on, baby. The man. Yeah.
And now back to more Pro Wrestling Radio and your host of the show, Eric Bartulo.
All righty, thank you very much. Let's bring back Terry Funk. And Terry,
I am so good, aren't I?
have you humbled yourself like that?
I am so humbled right now. I'm just getting more and more humbled at each moment that I hear from the past. What really POs me is dang, I'd like to be able to do promos like that again.
I just wanted to throw out there for you that you're going to be signing books up by my neck of the woods at Borders Express at the Montgomeryville Mall in North Wales, Pennsylvania. I have you listed here Saturday, June 11th, the day after Shane Douglas's ECW show from 1 to 3 p.m. So for the local fans in the area, you can go up there, say hello to Terry, and get your books autographed, buy some more books, and I'm sure you'd love seeing all the fans in Philly.
Well, I sure would. I'm looking forward to seeing the Philly fans. I want to tell you one thing, though.
Okay.
I want to tell you very seriously right now.
Okay.
You know, the the show that Vince is putting out,
Mm-hmm.
it can look like ECW. It can smell like ECW. It can have ECW performers, but it's not ECW, and don't forget it. It's Vince McMahon.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, you can come over here or you can go there, and you can be a pretend ECW fan, or you can come to the ECW show, and you can see a three-way dance.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you one thing. I am there because I want to be there. I had a choice, and I picked what I wanted to do because that is what is in my heart. And I don't want to see Vince McMahon, just like he did with the rise and fall of ECW. Oh, his ratings went down a bit. So what does he do? He puts out a video on the rise and fall of ECW.
Yeah.
And he goes ahead and puts that out. And Paul Heyman, who's supposed to be the creator and everything else, Paul Heyman evidently said that he owned whatever. He didn't own anything of those boys. But I never saw one check from that rise and fall of ECW. I never saw one penny from it. I don't think that Sabu has, or anybody else. But there was his highest rated, there was the highest selling DVD that he ever put out, I believe.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
And now he goes ahead and takes in all of that money because he couldn't produce it himself. It was the guys that produced that. And now he's going to go ahead and produce this pay-per-view, a pretend-to-be pay-per-view called ECW again. Who does this man think he is?
Yeah. Yep.
Who does he think he is?
Yep.
And I'll tell you what, I'm not the fondest guy of Shane Douglas, nor am I the fondest guy of the people running that show. But by God, we're a bunch of individuals over there, and we're a bunch of guys that are still around out there. There's still people around out there that you can call them what you want to, nuts, crazies, whatever. But I like to call them pro wrestlers. That dadgummit, they're just looking for a doggone stage to perform on.
Yeah.
And they need a stage. And by golly, we got one there, and we're going to give you a heck of a lot better show than the others do.
Yeah, and that's tremendous.
We're going to try our best, because by golly, we know it has to be.
And that's Friday night, June 10th at the ECW at the real ECW arena.
Thank you.
You got it. You got that right. And why don't we wrap up on a happier note, and maybe we can talk about some memories of a great man, a guy that I had the honor of knowing a little bit, and I know you knew him pretty well, Chris Candido, who passed away recently.
A great guy.
Yeah.
And the reason I love Chris Candido so much, and he's a breath of fresh air every night.
Yeah.
Chris Candido was, and he'd come into that dressing room no matter what had happened all day long or the day before or whatever, and he'd come in there, and boy, he was just a wonderful breath of fresh air. Is a great way to describe him whenever he'd come in there. And gosh, he was a fun guy. He loved the business probably more than anybody else I know, and he could do a better Terry Funk interview than... Are you sure that wasn't Chris Candido doing those? I'll bet you money that you better check that out.
I should check.
I think it's Chris Candido. That isn't Terry Funk.
He was even wearing your tights the one night I remember seeing him wrestle in the ECW arena.
Yeah, he'd come in he'd come into the ring and wrestle. Well, he'd wear them whenever I wasn't around, but finally he went ahead and wore them in front of me one night,
Yeah.
But, yeah, gosh darn, I just wish he was still around.
Yeah.
That's really a sad situation, whenever you get your life straightened out, get everything going right and everything, and you think you're doing well, and have a dadgum injury, and that's what's tough about it is is we have to pay our own bills and everything, and he didn't want to stay in that hospital because he wanted out of there.
Yeah.
So did that, flew back home, and threw a blood clot. And dadgummit, it's just a shame. It's a real tragic story, and a great guy that I thought the world of him.
And it goes back to something you write about in your book about the possibility of a union and how there should be some kind of union for these guys to dig into for medical expenses, at least.
There should, and it's not something that should be, I doubt if it'll ever happen.
Yeah.
But it should happen, and I'm not talking about for myself, but they should get together and bind together and get something at least medical. I've seen too many guys die and seen too many guys die in this business and not even be able to pay for their funeral, much less their medical.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it would be easy to do.
You break it down in your book, and you break it down so simplistically that there really is no reason that it can't be done.
No, it should be done.
Well, Terry, listen, what a fast hour this was. It was just an honor having you back. I would love to have you again, and I just want to wish you all the best of luck in the world with the new book. It is fantastic. You can get it at Amazon.com, at fine bookstores anywhere. And again, you are going to be in town here at the Montgomeryville Mall on Saturday, June 11th from 1 to 3 signing books. Terry, thanks again for doing the show.
And I want to be sure and tell everybody out there to, like I told you before, is buy that dadgum book and read it, and if you like it, go ahead and tell somebody else. Maybe they'll buy it, and if you don't like it, keep your dadgum mouth shut.
Terry, have a great weekend.
You too.
Thank you. Terry Funk, ladies and gentlemen, the one and only. I have had the honor and the pleasure of meeting a lot of guys in this business, and I tell people all the time that one of my favorites, one of the sweetest guys that I've ever met in this industry has been Terry Funk, and to be able to call a match of his, do commentary for his match with Steve Corino in the barbed wire match was just such an honor. And again, when I started in ECW as a ring announcer, and I weaseled my way in the beginning and then kind of got accepted and broken in, and I would just watch guys like Terry Funk and watch how they talk, how they walk, how they act, how they react, the things they say, the things they don't say. And that kind of presence is really lost today on independent wrestling. I've had the opportunity to be a part of some of these growing independent companies, and I'll walk in there, and sometimes the promoters will say, "What do you think?" Or some of the other guys will say, "What do you think?" And I'll say, I think you have a chance, but you're missing a key ingredient. You're missing that Terry Funk, the Terry Funk ingredient, which is the seasoned, experienced veteran that's going to go in there selflessly and do whatever or anything that he can to help get the company and the boys and the product over to the best of his abilities. And that is a critical component that is missing today in a lot of these blossoming independent companies that I work for now, companies that I have worked for, and companies that I see from a distance. So again, Terry Funk, his autobiography, More Than Just Hardcore, available at fine bookstores everywhere. It's available on Amazon.com. There is a link on my website, ProWrestlingRadio.com, so you can go there directly and just click on it. And if you missed Terry Funk's first appearance back in 2000, that interview as well is on my website, and that's also at ProWrestlingRadio.com. And at the time, he was just finishing up in WCW, so he was real animated about WCW at the time, and it was a lot of fun. He was a little more angry at that time as compared to today, so that's a good thing. Anyway, I want to thank Bill Melody for making things happen on this end of the dial. Following me today will be Chris Ermer and Lou Powers out at the Academy Theater. Bill Melody is back tomorrow from 6 to 10 a.m. A couple of quick show notes in the last minute that I have here. Next Saturday, the 28th of May, Bruno Sammartino is back on the show. One of my favorite guests, without a doubt the most controversial guest in show history. He will be back next Saturday, and I will open up the second half of the show for your calls. You can talk directly to Bruno. Bruno had a great time doing that the first time. We're going to do that again. On June 4th, I will be live on location at Trenton Heritage Days from the Bank of America on West State Street. I'll have stuff to give away. And I'm also going to have Matt Hardy on the show that day. over the phone, so you can come out there if you want to ask Matt a question. Maybe I'll open up the live mic and you can talk directly to Matt. Matt Hardy on the show as well, June 4th. June the 11th, we're going to have open calls. It'll be the only show in a while that will have an entire show devoted to your calls. And June the 18th, I am back at Somerton Beverages for Summerfest. They have free alcoholic samples, free food, prizes, St. Pauli girls, Bud girls. It is so much fun. We do it every year, and it is such a blast. I'll have stuff to give away myself and that much more. And again, for more information on all of the upcoming shows, or if you missed anything today, including the Terry Funk interview, check out ProWrestlingRadio.com. Well, that will about do it for me. I will see you next Saturday at 12:05 with Bruno Sammartino. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Right. And I knew these stars, too, and I knew how they tried to help each other, and I watched them, and I watched my dad was concerned about guys that weren't the greatest in the ring, but that were his friends, and he wanted to see them make a decent living in the profession and be able to continue it and enjoy life the way that they want to. And that's the same thing with me. I wish I could help more than what I do now. I wish I was younger and in my prime and could go to some different places and possibly pop up with a new organization and give it a total 100% of all, which I do give, but with all of my time I don't, because I can't give all of my time. Used to, as we'd wrestle 7 nights a week, and now we can't do that. I can't do it. Physically speaking, I'm fortunate to get in there, once a week or once every other week. I really prefer, and once a year, as I keep on burying the business in my backyard, but I keep on digging it up.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of what you're saying, I don't think people realize, unless they were actually there. I was lucky enough to be there in ECW as a ring announcer, and then, weaseling my way into the locker rooms, for a couple years before.
What it was.
Right.
So that's FMW. So I played off of the same letters of it. FMW is Funk Masters of Wrestling, and it worked wonderful. It worked great. It was really a hot item over there in Japan, and did big business with it. We did 45,000 people for a match over there without any television.
Wow.
40,000. I don't know if it was 45, 38, 45, 42, whatever they said it was, but it was a hell of a crowd. It was pretty much a full stadium.
Yeah, absolutely. An obvious question to start off with these days is, how are you feeling?
Feeling absolutely, I'm not going to say great.
Yeah.
I'd be lying to you. I'm feeling much, much better than what I was, and doing better day by day, and it just takes a little bit of time, come off of all that different stuff that I came off of, and you also have to get your confidence back, too, and before you have to believe that you're feeling good before you can feel good.
Sure. Speaking of professional confidence, when you were in WCW the last time, and you write a lot about this in your book, and the way they used you as compared to the way that you've been used in other places throughout your career, did it hurt your confidence? Did you ever question your confidence at all during that time?
Not my confidence.
That's all time. I hate your ever. And now your host of the show. That's how I live.
Welcome to a very special edition of Pro Wrestling Radio. You heard him in the beginning, and he is our guest for the entire hour. So let's not waste any time. He is the author of the autobiography, Terry Funk, More Than Just Hardcore. He is a former ECW and NWA World Heavyweight Champion, a true legend in the business, and most importantly, I have had the honor of calling some of this man's great matches. He is Terry Funk. Terry, welcome back to the show.
Well, it's great being back again. Last show that we were on, I thought it was a dang good one,
Oh, I was
just wondering who that guy that was at the front of that promo right there. Who was that guy hollering and screaming? That guy could talk.
Who was that crazy masked man?
I don't know. That boy was wild, wasn't he?
My producer looked at me and said, "Is that your guest?"
Yeah, right.
Well, Terry, off the bat, what do you remember about doing that Funk Masters of Wrestling deal? It sounded like a lot of fun.
It really was, and the reason I went with Funk Masters of Wrestling, if you think about it, is I could play right off of the FMW.
Mm-hmm.
See, in Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling is.
As far as I am concerned, Hayabusa, Tanaka, and the rest of that crew can't wear these people's shoes. They're too big for these so-called athletes. And I say not so-called because of their strength. I say so-called because of their heart. When you have a sin with no guts and the heart of a chicken, you produce wrestlers that have no guts and hearts of chickens. Now you have got the Funk Masters of Wrestling that are all heart, all guts, and we're not taking a backseat to anyone. No, never, never, never.
What's your wrestling? That's cool. Are you talking a name? Pro Wrestling Radio. Oh, get some! Take it down! Oh, the damn soul! Call in with a question or comment. 6-1! Just bring it! What is he doing? At 1-888-922-2149. Oh, it's true! Don't make me hurt you!
I just questioned my sanity, but I also questioned their sanity at the time,
Yeah.
I just thought I had a great deal to offer to them, and whenever I got there, evidently it was somebody up in the hierarchy that wanted me, but the people immediately, my superiors, weren't sure whether they needed me or not.
Right.
They certainly didn't loosen the reins and let me take off running.
No.
Well, and I don't blame them. It's their business.
Sure. Sure.
But I try not to, I try never to hurt a territory. I love coming into territory and popping it. That was one of the great things going down to Florida, or to any place, and going in and actually increasing their attendance, and then whenever I leave, is to leave that attendance where it is, if not better.
Do you think that you have more of an appreciation for that, the way that you were brought up with your own territory and with your father's territory?
Oh, absolutely. Because, if you want to go back, it's just the way that you were brought into the business and the way that you were brought up. And I was brought up in the business, and I was brought up around wrestlers. And I knew the guys that were not making a real good living, but they were making a living.